The snow was piled high outside the isolated farmhouse that was more or less in the middle of nowhere. The wind was howling as it blew the white powder around the different peaks. Barbara looked outside as she sipped her whiskey-infused hot chocolate, inwardly grateful that she had thought to put all the animals in the barns, and covering the gardens with tarp and sealing everything up tight when the first flakes started falling. "It'll be here any moment," she thought as she impulsively gulped down the last few mouthfuls of her drink at once, ignoring the intense burn that the pair together gave her. If anything, she wished that she'd added more alcohol because she had a long night ahead of her. But she had to keep her mind sharp for what was coming, what had been coming for a very long time. "Maybe I should check on the livestock again," she wondered as she took her mug back to the kitchen for a refill before dismissing the thought. The barn was surely sealed as tight as the last time she had checked. Nothing was going to happen to them. She shivered as she thought of the stories that had been passed down in her family for the past 200 years, how her family had found out the hard way when they had first settled here that there were things that not even God could protect them from. Their livelihood had almost been destroyed when their gardens had been completely dug up, and most of their animals had been massacred, save for a few lucky and quick ones. And it had all happened during a terrible snowstorm that created snow peaks that could be mistaken for mountains, much like the one that was occurring now. And it was Barbara's turn to have to deal with it despite the minuscule amount of skepticism that she was feeling about the whole thing. It wasn't like she'd ever seen the thing for herself, and conveniently enough, it was only supposed to appear every 50 years in weather like this, and when all the circumstances were set up, whoever existed was supposed to be prepared. Family lore had it that very first terrible night they had heard the growls and quiet roars of the creature, and the majority of the family had hid in their house cellar to pray with their Bible in hand, save for the patriarch's brother, who had foolishly gone outside to confront whatever denizen of hell had intruded upon their land, but had never come back inside. It's been said that they hadn't emerged from their hiding hole until they had heard birds chirping with the sun, and when they had gone to inspect the damage, it was revealed that in addition to the ravaged plants and dead animals, the stupid man was found in enough pieces that it took hours to collect them all and bury him, while telling anyone who asked that he contracted a sudden illness during that terrible winter. And of course everyone bought it, to say nothing about the supposed large and clawed footprints that had been imprinted deep into the snow. Someone had taken the time to draw them when they had regained their wits, and were kept in one of the family journals. They were intimidating enough when one looked at them. The story had been passed to the successive generations, and everyone had just laughed it off until 50 years after that night did the something supposedly come back and do the same damage to the animals and livestock, but no human casualties this time, having apparently learned their relatives' lesson. Their lives had been almost ruined twice, and they never took any chances when another 50 years passed and another bad snowstorm came, locking up all the animals and covering all plants. Minimal damage to the barn was the only event from that year. Now it was Barbara's turn, and she just wanted it all over and done with. She really wanted to fall asleep, as it was almost midnight, but she had to stay up to hear for the noise that it emitted, as everyone had always been fearful that if it couldn't get to the living things on the outside, it might come after what was on the inside. This was why she had to stay up, no matter how late it got. Once she heard the sound, she was to go into the cellar and pray, though personally she didn't see the point in the latter. She had been hearing the same stories since she was a kid, and this being a snowy night was making her feel emotionally drained and maybe just a little bit lonely, as she was the last of her family and she had lived for 27 years on nothing but her parents. She barely dated, and it seemed that it might stay that way, and maybe that was for the best. She was about to pour the hot water into the cocoa powder when she stopped and looked at the whiskey bottle on the counter beside the kettle. She simply switched off the kettle and unplugged it before grabbing the bottle and taking a big sip from it directly. "Oh, forget it," she sighed as she took the nearly full bottle with her. When she returned to her vigil at the window, she took a look at the antique clock in the living room. It indicated that it was close to midnight, and she groaned before taking another gulp, and it wasn't long before she was chugging the entire thing down. An inhuman noise startled her awake some time later, and she opened her bleary eyes before trying to look at the clock. But she couldn't read it, and didn't even try to. She was already having a tough time getting to her feet. Was it? She wondered as her hand touched the knob of her front door. Something was nagging at her in the back of her mind that this wasn't a good idea, but she ignored it as she turned and the old wooden door opened with a creak. Everything was white. The snowstorm had become a blizzard, and she couldn't see anything now, and yet somehow she had the idea to go forward. The only sound that she could hear now was the wind's continuous whistling and the crunching of snow under her feet, at least until she heard a louder crunching sound behind her that caused her to turn around, only to meet a shadow hand that grabbed her throat and squeezed tightly. Her vision slowly changed from white to black before she slipped away. The being dropped the woman's body as soon as it felt her life force slip away with a smirk. Finally, the last of the intruders had perished. No more invaders on their land. The shadow was now in such a joyful mood that it reached towards the corpse with claws fully unsheathed.